Hey guys, this is a disassembled Gemtech GVAC Upper receiver group. This is an upper receiver with a novel gas block design that's supposed to mitigate the effects of overgassing when used with a suppressor. It's a pretty cool idea and something I think is going to become a lot more popular as suppressors become more ubiquitous in the market. So I wanted to take one of these things apart, show you guys the insides, and talk about what it does and does not do. When you add a suppressor to the end of a rifle, you increase the back pressure. That means there's more gas going back into the action, and that's bad for a couple of reasons. Number one is the function of the rifle. If you're increasing the back pressure, you're probably going to be increasing the bolt velocity. That means you're increasing wear and tear on the gun, and it's possible you'll induce some reliability problems. Most ARs are really tolerant of overgassing. They don't get unreliable, they just run really hard, they have more recoil, and they probably beat the crap out of themselves a lot faster. The other side effect of increased back pressure is decreased shooter comfort. All that gas comes back into your workspace, and then you get to breathe clouds of it and little jets of it go into your eyeballs, under your eye protection. It's not very fun. There are tons of ways to tune a gun to shoot suppressed. The easiest way is to drop in a heavier buffer weight that keeps the action closed longer and allows more gas to go out the front end of the gun instead of the back end of the gun. The Gemtech GVAC system is principally a bore evacuator built into an AR-15 gas system. A bore evacuator is a device that you find on a lot of tank cannons, self-propelled guns, stuff like that, going back all the way to, I think, about World War II. The bore evacuator is an expansion chamber for the gases generated by firing a projectile. It fills up with gas, and then it has some holes pointing forwards, and once the projectile leaves the barrel, the gas stored up in the bore evacuator would very much like to leave, and it goes out the end of the barrel because of the pressure differential, rather than going back into the fighting compartment. Gemtech, in case you don't know, is a suppressor company, but they're owned by Smith & Wesson, so this is basically a Smith & Wesson product, which you'll see hints of a little bit later on. These uppers were announced at the same time as Gemtech's newer generation of suppressors, the Abyss and the Neutron. And I think that's important to understanding a few things about this system. The Abyss 556 suppressor from Gemtech is a lower back pressure suppressor, especially when compared to Gemtech's other cans, which were all very old designs. The Gemtech GVAC Upper system does not actually reduce back pressure, so this has really no effect on the operation of the firearm itself. It's just a way to get gas flowing out the end of the barrel instead of out the ejection port and coming back through the receiver into the shooter's face. So really, it works best in conjunction with low back pressure cans to further reduce the amount of gas going into your face. So if you have a traditional high back pressure can, this upper system simply is not for you, because you're still going to have to take steps to tune the gun to run suppressed. So anyway, let's talk about the upper itself. This one is the 16-inch mid-length version. It should also be available at some point as an 11-inch carbine gas upper. These are sold as an almost complete upper. The only thing missing is a charging handle, I suspect because Smith & Wesson and Gemtech understand that most people would like their own special suppressor-tuned charging handle, but those are also very subjective and also very expensive, apparently even for OEMs to buy. The barrel on this upper is what I would describe as a medium taper contour. It's made out of 4150 CRMOV steel, nitride finished with a mid-length gas system, and it has 5R rifling, which is pretty common for Smith & Wesson barrels. The bolt carrier group is another place where some changes have been made to the mil-spec style of AR. The bolt carrier group is phosphate-coated and chrome-lined rather than nitrided. I believe the bolt head is Carpenter 158 rather than 9310 steel. These things also have some additional sand cuts on the back of the bolt carrier group's tail, as well as around the circumference of the firing pin. These are supposed to mitigate the effects of fouling caused by shooting suppressed. I'm not really sure how well that stuff works, but I'm sure it can't hurt. Once again, the nefarious presence of Smith & Wesson rears its ugly head because this is not an M16 profile carrier, it is a sporter carrier, as you can tell by the reduced amount of material on the tail of the BCG. How much does that matter? I don't personally give a shit, but your mileage may vary. The handguards on these uppers are Midwest Industries M-LOK combat rails. The 16-inch barreled version has a 15-inch combat rail. The 11.5, I assume, will have a 10.5 rail. These uppers ship with the new Gemtech ETM flash hider muzzle devices. This is the suppressor mount system for their Abyss and Neutron suppressors. I could be off base here, but I think the suppressors come with muzzle brakes, so if you want to get the flash hider instead of the muzzle brake, you may be forced to buy one of these uppers. Out of the box, the muzzle device is actually installed and timed with a crush washer, which is probably not something you want if you're going to be mounting a suppressor. However, the box includes a shim kit for the muzzle device and instructions saying that if you're going to use this thing with a suppressor, you should take the muzzle device off, reinstall it using the shim kit to get it timed up, and then mount the suppressor that way. I think the idea here is that it's a lot easier for them to assemble the upper using a crush washer to time the flash hider, which yes, does have a closed bottom like an A2 birdcage, so it does have to be timed. But you're not necessarily buying one of these things to use the new Gemtech can. Maybe you've already got your own suppressor and your own muzzle device already picked out. The first time I shot with one of these uppers was at a Gemtech event, and it was at an indoor range. And guess what? There's nothing you can do to mitigate the effect of gas at an indoor range. Even if you're not shooting suppressed, it's still going to choke you out because it's an indoor fucking range. Also, apparently the air circulation fans at that range were on a timer and nobody realized, so they turned off and the entire place filled with smoke and was quite miserable. So at first I kind of had to wonder if the upper did anything at all. But then the next day we shot them on an outdoor range and yeah, did make a pretty big difference. Granted, we were using the low flow Gemtech suppressors with the uppers, so it could have been partially the effect of the upper and partially the effect of the suppressor. I tested this one out using my Gemtech Trek 2, which is a old school direct thread suppressor with very high back pressure, and it definitely seems to be a little bit more pleasant than shooting it on a normal untuned AR upper. But like I said, this really only addresses the shooter comfort side of the equation, and the gun, as we were shooting it, was still pretty badly overgassed because we put a high back pressure suppressor on a 16-inch mid-length gas system. Even with an A5 buffer system and an A5 H2 buffer weight, it was still running pretty hard. We did some accuracy testing of this barrel as well, and it seems like the Smith & Wesson 5R rifling still makes for a pretty damn good barrel. We tested a couple different loads, including basic ball ammunition, as well as AAC 77 grain match and ADI 69 grain match, and this thing grouped pretty damn good for a standard AR mid-profile barrel. It's not stainless, it's got a middle-of-the-road twist rate, definitely more of a combat barrel, but hey, it still fucking groups. So what about the elephant in the room? A lot of you guys probably look at this thing and say, hey man, I don't really like Midwest Industries combat rails. Could I get one of these things and put my own handguard on it? And yes, you can. The gas block and bore evacuator system is not that difficult to remove. It's basically a standard low-profile gas block, but with a big chunk of metal added on the front to serve as the expansion chamber. It's attached to the barrel with one set screw and also a cross pin. There is a little ridge milled into the circumference of the barrel that the cross pin goes into to keep things in place, keep it from walking off. The set screw makes sure that it stays timed to the vertical. The way Gemtech has pinned this gas block is a little strange. It's not a coil pin like you would find on, for example, a Ballistic Advantage pinned gas block. It's more of a solid pin that seems to have been tapped in, then chopped off, and I guess ground flat with like a fucking grinder. And whoever put this thing together maybe wasn't super careful about it, so there's some grinding marks on the actual gas block itself. I don't know if this was just like built on a Friday or if they all look like this. It looks a little shitty, to be honest with you, but I don't think it's going to affect anything whatsoever. You can remove and reinstall that little pin without any issue. Also, the Midwest Industries combat rail is one of the slimmest handguards on the market, so if that gas block and bore evacuator system will fit under a Midwest rail, it'll probably fit under almost anything. So to wrap all this up, is the Gemtech GVAC Upper a good buy? It's probably at its best if you've already got one of the new Gemtech ETM-compatible suppressors. Not only do you get your hands on the very hard-to-find ETM flash hider, but you also don't have to do too much else to tune the rifle because those suppressors are relatively low back pressure. These uppers have a good barrel, a good bolt carrier group, and a good handguard, although of course they're not going to appeal to everybody. If you look at one of these things and think, man, I'd have to replace the bolt carrier group with a full mass M16 profile bolt carrier group, and I'd have to replace the handguard with something I like a little bit better, and you don't have a low back pressure can, so you'd still end up having to tune the rifle anyway, then it's definitely not a good idea.